Washington burned in August of 1814, not because it was strategically vital, but because it was symbolically vulnerable. The city was young, disorganized, and poorly defended. And when British forces marched in after defeating American troops at Bladensburg, they found a capital that looked more like an unfinished idea than a seat of power. The War of 1812 had dragged on for 2 exhausting years by that point, and neither side had achieved the decisive victory it wanted. Britain, already stretched thin by the ongoing Napoleonic Wars, sought a sharp psychological blow that might force the United States to negotiate. Burning Washington was never about holding territory. It was about humiliation. The British entered the city on August 24th with little resistance. Government officials had already fled. President James Madison escaped just hours before. What followed was a methodical destruction of symbols, rather than a wholesale sacking of the city. The Capitol building was set ablaze, its unfinished stone structure blackened and hollowed. The Library of Congress, housed within it, was destroyed. The president's house was torched, flames licking through the roof and consuming its interior. The Treasury, the War Department, and other government buildings followed. Contrary to later myth, the British did not burn private homes indiscriminately. Their orders focused on public buildings, and in many cases, officers actively prevented looting. But the fires they set burned fiercely in the humid August air, fed by wooden interiors and unfinished construction. By nightfall, Washington glowed orange against the darkness, a capital in flames under foreign occupation. And then, without warning, the sky changed. The heat of the fires rose into the air, mixing with a volatile summer atmosphere already primed for violence. Clouds gathered rapidly, winds shifted, the air thickened with pressure. What began as a storm quickly escalated into something far more destructive. Rain came first, sudden and heavy, hammering the city with sheets of water. Fires that had raged uncontested for hours began to sputter and die. Flames on rooftops were smothered, embers were drowned. Buildings still standing were spared total destruction simply because the rain arrived when it did. But the rain was only the beginning. Witnesses described winds so powerful they tore roofs from buildings and sent debris flying through the streets. Chimneys collapsed. Trees snapped. Cannonballs, already heavy and dangerous, were reportedly lifted or rolled by the force of the storm. Some accounts describe what today would likely be classified as a tornado touching down within the city. While meteorological records from the era are incomplete, the descriptions align with tornadic behavior. Violent, rotating winds. British soldiers were caught in the open as the storm intensified. Accounts vary, but multiple sources report soldiers killed by falling masonry and flying debris. Civilians, too, were injured or killed, struck by collapsing structures or hurled objects. At least 2 British cannons were reportedly moved by the storm, either shifted from their placements or overturned entirely. Whether lifted outright or simply pushed by extreme winds remains debated. The British found themselves occupying a burning city that was now being actively dismantled by nature itself. Rain turned streets into mud. Visibility dropped. Command structures strained. Fires they had set were extinguished without their control, denying them the dramatic spectacle of a capital reduced fully to ash. More importantly, the storm changed the calculus of occupation. The British had never intended to hold Washington for long. Their mission was punitive, not territorial. But the violence of the storm accelerated their timeline. Remaining in the city suddenly carried risks that had nothing to do with American resistance. Supplies were soaked. Powder became unreliable. Camps were disrupted. The psychological effect of the storm cannot be overstated. 2 soldiers already deep in enemy territory, a violent and seemingly targeted act of weather would have felt ominous. By the next day, British forces withdrew from Washington. The occupation had lasted roughly 24 hours. In the aftermath, Americans searched for meaning in the chaos. A city had been burned, yes, but not destroyed. Key structures survived. The storm had intervened at the moment of greatest vulnerability. Almost immediately, stories began to circulate that the storm had saved Washington. Some framed it as divine intervention, a sign that Providence had stepped in where American defenses had failed. Sermons referenced the rain as evidence that the nation was protected by forces beyond human control. Others took a more practical view, arguing that the British retreat was always planned and that the storm merely coincided with their withdrawal. According to this interpretation, the British had accomplished their objective and left as intended, storm or no storm. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Military records suggest the British did not plan a prolonged stay, but they also show that the storm caused real disruption and casualties. Nature did not single-handedly drive the British out, but it undeniably complicated their exit and curtailed the damage they might otherwise have inflicted. The storm also reshaped how Americans remembered the event. Rather than a story of total defeat, the burning of Washington became a narrative of resilience. The city rose again. The Capitol was rebuilt. The President's house was restored, its white paint later becoming a defining feature. The storm became part of the mythology of American survival. In later retellings, the storm grew more dramatic. The tornado became more certain. The casualties more severe. The cannons heavier. Each generation polished the story, sharpening its edges. But even stripped of embellishment, the core facts remain extraordinary. A foreign army occupied the U.S. Capitol, set it on fire, and then was met by a sudden, violent storm that extinguished flames, killed soldiers, and forced an accelerated withdrawal. Weather has always influenced warfare, but rarely so theatrically and so symbolically. The storm of 1814 did not win the war. It did not erase the humiliation of Washington's burning, but it altered the outcome of a moment that could have been far worse. Had the fires burned unchecked through the night, more of the city would have been destroyed. Had the British remained longer, they might have expanded their destruction or attempted to hold the city briefly as leverage. Instead, Washington survived scarred, embarrassed, but intact enough to rebuild. And so the story endured. A reminder that history is not shaped by human decisions alone. That chance, chaos, and the natural world sometimes step onto the stage uninvited, rewriting outcomes in ways no one can fully control. In August of 1814, Washington fell to fire. And then, just as suddenly, was spared by the sky. Not because the nation was ready, not because its defenses held, but because a storm arrived at exactly the right moment. And that, perhaps more than any battlefield victory, is what made the event unforgettable.